Why the person who awakens you also breaks you. There is a question that almost no one dares to ask out loud on the twin flame journey. Not because it is unspiritual, not because it is negative, but because it hits too close to the truth. That question is this: why does the person who feels like my soul make me feel the least worthy? If you have ever been on a twin flame path, you know exactly what this feels like. This is not ordinary heartbreak. This is not just missing someone. This is not simply loving deeply. This is the kind of connection that rearranges your identity, shakes your sense of self, and exposes wounds you didn't even know you had. And yet, paradoxically, it often leaves you feeling unseen, unchosen, abandoned, not enough. How can a soul connection feel so sacred, and yet trigger so much pain around self-worth? That contradiction is where today's message begins. Because what if the purpose of twin flame love was never to complete you? What if it was never meant to save you? What if it was designed to confront you with the places where you forgot your own value? Most people enter the twin flame experience believing one thing: this person is here because they are my other half. But the deeper truth is far more uncomfortable and far more liberating. They are not your missing piece. They are your mirror. And mirrors do not exist to flatter us. They exist to show us what is already there, especially the parts we have avoided seeing. This is why twin flame connections often begin with intensity, passion, recognition, and spiritual awakening, and then descend into confusion, separation, longing, and emotional collapse. Not because the love was fake, but because the lesson is deeper than romance. Twin flames do not appear when you feel whole. They appear when you are ready to face the illusion that your worth depends on being chosen, desired, or stayed with. And that is the part no one prepares you for. You might recognize this pattern. At first, the connection feels effortless. You feel seen in ways you never have before. You feel home for the first time in your life. And then slowly or suddenly something shifts. They pull away. They hesitate. They withdraw. They disappear emotionally or physically. And when they do, your mind does not just ask, why did they leave? It asks something far more painful. What's wrong with me? That question is not random. It is not weakness. It is the doorway to the core lesson of twin flame love: self-worth. Twin flames don't trigger surface wounds. They activate core beliefs, the ones formed long before this lifetime's love story. Beliefs like, I have to earn love. I'm not enough as I am. People leave once they really see me. I must try harder to be chosen. These beliefs don't come from your twin flame. They existed long before them. Your twin flame simply illuminates them with surgical precision. This is why the pain feels disproportionate. This is why the longing feels unbearable. This is why losing them feels like losing yourself. Because in some way, consciously or unconsciously, you tied your value to their presence. And twin flame energy does not tolerate false foundations. It dismantles anything built on lack. That is why separation is not a punishment. It is a recalibration. A brutal one, but a necessary one. Here is something most spiritual teachings won't tell you. Twin flames often arrive at the exact moment you are ready to stop outsourcing your worth. Not when you believe that, but when your soul is ready to be forced into learning it. And forcing is sometimes the only way the ego lets go. Think about it. If the connection had stayed perfect, if they had never pulled away, if they had chosen you without hesitation, would you have ever questioned whether you believed you were enough on your own? Probably not. You would have stayed comfortable inside the illusion that love completes you. But twin flame love is not here to make you comfortable. It is here to make you conscious. That is why so many twin flame connections feel like emotional initiation rites. They strip away attachment, validation addiction, people-pleasing, self-abandonment. They expose where you give power away in the name of love. And that exposure hurts. It hurts because it shatters a fantasy not of the other person but of who you thought you were when loved. At some point, every twin flame journey asks the same terrifying question. Who are you when the person who reflected your light steps back? That moment when the reflection disappears is where most people fall apart. They chase. They wait. They hope. They bargain with the universe. They ask psychics, tarot readers, signs, timelines. But all of that searching is avoiding the real initiation. Because the lesson is not about reunion. It is about self-worth without witnesses. Can you still see yourself as valuable when no one is choosing you? Can you still love yourself when the mirror walks away? Can you still stand in your truth when the connection no longer validates it? Twin flames don't come to answer those questions for you. They come to force you to answer them yourself. And that is why this connection feels so sacred and so devastating at the same time. Because it asks something no other relationship ever does. Love yourself first or lose me. Not as a threat, but as a law of energetic alignment. If you are here listening to this, there is a strong chance that you are not broken. You are not abandoned by the universe. You are not failing the journey. You are standing at the threshold of the most important lesson twin flame love has to offer. The lesson of self-worth that does not depend on being chosen. In the next part, we will explore why twin flames choose you in the first place, and how the resonance of unhealed worth wounds creates this powerful and painful bond. But for now, sit with this question. If your twin flame never returned, who would you become? Because the answer to that question is the real beginning of your awakening. Energetic resonance, self-worth wounds, and the invisible contract of twin flames. There is a moment on every twin flame journey when a disturbing realization begins to surface. Not all at once, not clearly, but quietly, persistently, like a truth that refuses to be ignored. That realization is this: your twin flame didn't choose you because you were healed. They chose you because you resonated at the same unresolved frequency. This is where many people resist. Because it sounds unromantic. Because it feels like it diminishes the sacredness of the connection. Because it threatens the idea that love should arrive as a reward. But the truth is more profound than that. Twin flame connections are not formed at the level of personality, preference, or even conscious desire. They form at the level of energetic recognition. And energy does not recognize perfection. Energy recognizes familiar patterns. This is why twin flame encounters often feel instantaneous and overwhelming. It is not because you finally found the one. It is because your nervous systems, emotional wounds, and soul memory recognized each other immediately. Before words. Before logic. Before boundaries. This is the part no one warns you about. Twin flames don't meet because they are complete. They meet because they share a common unfinished lesson. Most often around self-worth. Let's talk about what that actually means. Self-worth wounds are not always obvious. They don't always look like low confidence, insecurity, or self-hatred. In fact, many people on the twin flame path appear strong, independent, accomplished, spiritual, or emotionally intelligent. But self-worth wounds hide in subtler places. They hide in beliefs like, I'm valuable when I'm needed. I'm lovable when I'm chosen. I matter when I'm prioritized. I'm enough when someone stays. These beliefs are rarely conscious. They form early through childhood dynamics, emotional neglect, inconsistent love, abandonment, or conditional approval. And they don't disappear just because you grow up, succeed, or become spiritually aware. They wait. They wait for a relationship powerful enough to activate them. That relationship is often a twin flame. This is why twin flames feel different from soulmates, karmic partners, or ordinary loves. Soulmates feel safe. Twin flames feel exposing. They touch the exact places where your sense of worth is still outsourced. And that is not an accident. Energetic resonance means this. You did not attract your twin flame because you were worthy. You attracted them because your unhealed belief about worth matched theirs. This is where the illusion of being chosen begins. At the start of the connection, being chosen feels intoxicating. You feel special, seen, recognized, validated. For the first time, it feels like someone truly sees your soul. And in that moment, something dangerous happens. Not because love is dangerous, but because your identity begins to anchor to the connection. You don't realize it yet, but part of you starts to believe, if someone like this chooses me, I must finally be enough. This is not conscious manipulation. This is survival wiring. Your twin flame doesn't exploit this. They simply activate it. And eventually, inevitably, the dynamic shifts. Why? Because twin flame energy does not allow relationships built on external validation to survive. The moment your worth becomes dependent on their presence, the energetic balance breaks. And when balance breaks, separation begins. This is where many people misunderstand what is happening. They assume, they stopped loving me. I wasn't good enough. I failed the journey. I need to change so they'll come back. But none of that is the truth. What actually happened is far more confronting. The relationship reached the limit of what your current self-worth could sustain. Twin flames cannot remain in dynamics where one or both partners are unconsciously using the connection to fill an internal void. That doesn't mean the love disappears. It means the lesson intensifies. This is why twin flame separation feels so different from normal breakups. You are not just grieving a person. You are grieving the identity you became in their reflection. The version of yourself that felt worthy because they chose you. The future you imagined where your value was confirmed by reunion. And underneath all of that grief is a deeper fear. If they don't choose me, who am I? That fear is the wound. And that wound is the reason they came. Twin flames don't choose you because you are the best. They choose you because you are ready to confront the lie that your worth is conditional. And confronting that lie requires extreme circumstances. Gentle relationships don't do that. Comfortable love doesn't do that. Only a connection that feels irreplaceable can force you to ask the questions you've avoided your entire life. This is why twin flame dynamics often involve chasing and withdrawing, hot and cold behavior, deep intimacy followed by distance, intense longing followed by silence. These patterns are not signs of failure. They are symptoms of worth wounds coming to the surface. The chaser feels, I'll do more so you'll stay. The runner feels, I can't stay because I feel overwhelmed, exposed, or unworthy myself. Both are reacting to the same underlying issue, unresolved self-worth. Neither is the villain. Neither is the hero. Both are mirrors. And the mirror is ruthless, because it reflects not only how you love but why. Here is the turning point most people miss. Twin flame love stops hurting the moment you stop trying to earn it. The pain exists only while you believe love must be proven, maintained, or secured. Once you realize that your worth is not negotiated through another person's presence, the energetic contract changes. And that is terrifying, because it means letting go of the hope that reunion will save you. It means choosing yourself without guarantees. It means standing in value even if no one is watching, choosing, or staying. This is why many people unconsciously resist healing on the twin flame path. Healing threatens the identity built around longing. Healing threatens the story that suffering equals depth. Healing threatens the fantasy that being chosen will finally make everything okay. But twin flame love does not reward suffering. It rewards sovereignty. They choose you not to stay forever, but to bring you to the edge of your own worth. And from that edge you must decide. Will you continue to define yourself by how deeply you are wanted? Or will you finally claim value without permission? In the next part, we will explore how twin flames deliberately activate the fear of not enough, and why this fear must surface before true union, internal or external, is even possible. But before you move on, sit with this truth. They did not choose you to complete you. They chose you to return you to yourself. And that is the most demanding kind of love there is. Why twin flames trigger your deepest fear before they can teach you self-worth. There is a reason twin flame pain feels different from every other kind of emotional pain you have ever known. It is not just sadness. It is not just rejection. It is not just loss. It feels like your existence is being questioned. When a twin flame pulls away, the nervous system does not register it as a normal relational event. It registers it as a threat to identity. This is why the fear that rises is not rational. It is primal. And at the center of that fear is a single belief. I am not enough. Not enough to be chosen. Not enough to be stayed with. Not enough to be loved without conditions. This belief does not originate in your twin flame connection. They simply activate it. Twin flames are not gentle activators. They do not softly nudge your wounds. They rip the bandage off. Because the lesson they carry cannot be learned intellectually. It must be felt. And the feeling of not enough is one of the oldest emotional imprints humans carry. Most people spend their entire lives avoiding it. Twin flame love makes avoidance impossible. Let's be very clear about something. Your twin flame is not triggering your fear of not enough because they are cruel, avoidant, or emotionally unavailable. They are triggering it because your soul has agreed to face it. And facing it requires intensity. The fear of not enough is not a surface insecurity. It is a core wound that forms when love feels conditional, when affection is inconsistent, when approval must be earned, when presence is unpredictable. Even if your childhood looked normal on the outside, the nervous system remembers moments when love felt uncertain, moments when you learned silently that being yourself was risky. So you adapted. You became more pleasing, more giving, more understanding, more patient. You learned how to love in a way that minimized abandonment. And then one day you met your twin flame, and everything you learned stopped working. Because twin flame energy does not respond to coping strategies. It bypasses them. This is why the usual tools fail. Overgiving doesn't fix it. Explaining doesn't fix it. Proving your worth doesn't fix it. Waiting doesn't fix it. Nothing fixes it. Because the point is not to fix the relationship. The point is to expose the wound. The fear of not enough is activated most strongly when three things happen simultaneously. 1. Deep emotional recognition. 2. Inconsistent availability. 3. Loss of control. Twin flames provide all three. They see you deeply, which makes you open. They pull away, which makes you unsafe. And you cannot control the outcome, which collapses the ego. This combination is devastating and precise. It brings you face to face with the moment where love and self-worth became entangled. At some point in the connection, you may notice thoughts like, if I were more attractive, they would stay. If I were more healed, they would choose me. If I didn't need so much, this wouldn't happen. If I were truly worthy, this wouldn't hurt. These thoughts feel personal, but they are ancient. They are the voice of a wounded self that learned long ago that love must be deserved. Twin flames don't create that voice. They amplify it until it becomes impossible to ignore. Why? Because ignoring it keeps you trapped. Here is the uncomfortable truth. As long as you believe you are not enough, you will unconsciously accept relationships that confirm that belief. Twin flame dynamics often include emotional unavailability, not because you deserve it, but because your nervous system recognizes it as familiar. This is not victim blaming. It is pattern awareness. And awareness is the beginning of liberation. The fear of not enough creates a loop. They pull away, you feel unworthy, you try harder, they pull away more, you feel even less worthy. This loop feels like love, but it is not love. It is attachment trauma disguised as destiny. And twin flame energy does not allow that loop to continue indefinitely. Eventually, the pain becomes unbearable. And that is intentional. Because unbearable pain is what forces a choice. At some point, every twin flame reaches a breaking moment where they ask, how long can I keep abandoning myself to be loved? That question marks the beginning of transformation. Before that moment, the fear of not enough controls your behavior. After it, you begin to see the cost. The cost of chasing. The cost of waiting. The cost of shrinking. The cost of tolerating uncertainty in the name of love. Twin flames do not want you small. They do not want you desperate. They do not want you sacrificing yourself. If they did, the connection would never hurt this much. The pain exists because your soul is resisting self-abandonment. And that resistance grows stronger over time. This is why many people experience a sudden shift after prolonged twin flame suffering. One day something breaks. Not in a dramatic way, but quietly. You realize, I cannot keep doing this to myself. That moment is sacred, because it is the moment you stop trying to be enough for someone else, and begin asking whether you are enough for yourself. Here is where the deepest paradox appears. The fear of not enough dissolves not when they return, but when you stop needing them to prove your worth. That does not mean the love disappears. It means the power dynamic collapses. And when the power dynamic collapses, the lesson completes. Twin flame energy is not sustained by imbalance. It is sustained by alignment. And alignment cannot exist where self-worth is conditional. This is why the fear must surface fully. Not partially. Not intellectually. Fully. You must feel what it is like to believe you are not enough. so you can finally see that belief for what it is. A story. A story formed in pain. A story repeated through relationships. A story that has been running your life. Twin flame love brings that story to its breaking point. Because once it breaks, something else can emerge. Something quieter. Something steadier. Something that does not beg, chase, or collapse. In the next part, we will explore why twin flames force you to choose yourself before you can love anyone else, and how self-worth becomes the gateway to real union, whether internal or external. But before you move on, ask yourself this: what have I been willing to tolerate because I believed I was not enough to ask for more? The answer to that question is not meant to shame you. It is meant to free you, because the moment you see the pattern clearly is the moment it begins to lose its power. And that is exactly where twin flame awakening truly begins. Why twin flames force you to choose yourself before you can love anyone else. There comes a moment on the twin flame path that feels like betrayal, not by the other person but by the universe itself. You did the inner work. You loved deeply. You showed up authentically. And still they pulled away. Still the connection did not stabilize. Still you were left standing alone with your feelings. This is usually the point where people ask, why would a soul connection do this to me? But the better question is, what is this connection refusing to allow me to keep doing to myself? Because twin flame love does not end when the other person leaves. It ends when self-abandonment becomes impossible. Up until this stage, much of your love, even when sincere, was conditional. Not consciously conditional. Energetically conditional. You loved, but you also waited. You gave, but you also hoped. You accepted, but you also tolerated. And tolerance is the quietest form of self-betrayal. Twin flames are incapable of staying in relationships where one or both partners are betraying themselves in order to stay connected. Not because they don't care, but because the connection exists to break that pattern. This is where the journey shifts from romantic longing to spiritual initiation. Because now the lesson is no longer about the other person. It is about you. Choosing yourself is not a motivational slogan. On the twin flame path, it is a non-negotiable requirement. And this is where most people resist. Because choosing yourself feels like giving up on love. Feels like letting go of destiny. Feels like failing the connection. But in reality, choosing yourself is the only way the connection ever had meaning. Here is the paradox most people struggle to accept. You cannot truly love someone else while abandoning yourself. You can attach. You can long. You can sacrifice. But love, real love, does not require self-erasure. Twin flame love exposes how often you confuse endurance with devotion. How often you confuse suffering with depth. How often you confuse waiting with loyalty. And eventually the soul intervenes. The intervention looks like separation. Silence. Distance. Not to punish you but to corner you into a choice. That choice is simple but terrifying. Will you keep making yourself smaller to keep the connection alive? Or will you finally stand in your worth, even if it costs you the relationship? Twin flame energy will not let you choose both. This is where many people misunderstand choosing yourself. They think it means becoming cold, detached, emotionally shut down. But that is not self-choice. That is defense. Choosing yourself means something much harder. No longer chasing clarity from someone who is unavailable. No longer negotiating your boundaries for emotional crumbs. No longer putting your life on hold waiting for someone to decide. It means staying present with your pain without abandoning your dignity. This is why twin flame love feels so brutal. Because the lesson cannot be bypassed. You can delay it. You can distract yourself. You can spiritualize the suffering. But eventually the exhaustion sets in. And exhaustion is sacred. Because exhaustion ends performance. At some point, you simply don't have the energy to keep proving your worth. And in that moment something profound happens. You stop asking, what do I need to do so they'll choose me? And you start asking, why am I choosing a situation that requires me to suffer to feel loved? That question marks the death of the old self. The self that believed love must be earned. The self that believed patience equals virtue. The self that believed waiting equals faith. Twin flames do not teach self-worth gently. They teach it by removing every external source of validation. until the only place left to stand is within yourself. This is why so many people feel lost during this phase, because the identity that existed inside the connection is dissolving. You are no longer the one being chosen, the one being chased, the one being mirrored. You are simply you, and that emptiness feels unbearable at first. But that emptiness is not absence. It is space. Space for something that could never emerge while you were orienting your value around another person. Self-worth is not something you affirm into existence. It is something you practice through choice, through actions like walking away from inconsistency, honoring your emotional limits, choosing peace over anticipation, choosing clarity over hope. These choices feel wrong at first, because they contradict everything your attachment system learned about love. But they feel right in the body, calmer, quieter, cleaner, and that calm is unfamiliar, which is why many people mistake it for emptiness. But it is not emptiness. It is self-sovereignty. Twin flames cannot meet you in self-sovereignty until you claim it. That does not mean reunion is guaranteed. It means the lesson is complete. And this is the part people fear most, because choosing yourself means releasing control over the outcome, means saying, I choose my worth whether this person stays or not. That sentence is not spiritual bypassing. It is energetic alignment, because the moment your worth no longer depends on the connection no longer has power over you. And power imbalance is the only thing that ever made it painful. Twin flame love does not require sacrifice. It requires presence. Presence with yourself. Presence with your truth. Presence with your boundaries. This is why some people experience a shift after choosing themselves. Sometimes the twin flame returns transformed. Sometimes they don't. But in both cases the suffering ends. Because suffering only exists where self-worth is conditional. The ultimate initiation of twin flame love is not union with another. It is union with yourself. Everything else is secondary. In the next part, we will explore what happens energetically and psychologically when you stop chasing, stop waiting, and stop making the twin flame the center of your life, and why that shift changes everything. But for now, sit with this truth. The twin flame journey does not ask, how much can you endure for love? It asks, how much are you willing to honor yourself? And the moment you answer that question honestly, you step out of suffering and into sovereignty. That is where the real transformation begins. What happens when you stop chasing, stop waiting, and reclaim your center? There is a very specific moment on the twin flame journey that almost no one talks about. Not because it is rare, but because it does not look dramatic from the outside. There are no fireworks. No instant reunion. No cosmic signs falling from the sky. Instead, something quieter happens. Something internal. You stop chasing. Not because you are trying to detach. Not because you are following spiritual advice. Not because you are forcing yourself to let go. You stop chasing because something inside you finally refuses to keep bleeding. This moment usually arrives after exhaustion, after hoping no longer works, after waiting no longer feels noble, after love begins to feel like self-neglect. Up until this point, the twin flame connection has likely been the axis of your inner world. Your moods rise and fall with their attention. Your sense of direction depends on signs, dreams, messages, synchronicities. Your future feels paused, waiting for clarity that never fully arrives. And without realizing it, your life begins orbiting another person. Not physically, energetically. This is the hidden cost of making the twin flame the center. When someone becomes the center of your emotional universe, you leave your own axis. And twin flame energy cannot remain stable when you are off-center. This is why the chasing phase feels so desperate and powerless. Not because you are weak, but because you are no longer standing in yourself. Chasing is not about love. Chasing is about regaining stability through another person. And that never works. The shift begins when you stop asking, what are they feeling? What are they thinking? When will they come back? And start asking, what has this connection cost me? This is not bitterness. This is clarity. You begin to notice things you were too focused to see before. How much mental space the connection occupies. How often you abandon your own needs to preserve hope. How your sense of worth fluctuates with their behavior. And suddenly the question changes. It is no longer, why aren't they choosing me? It becomes, why did I choose to disappear from my own life? That question is sobering, because it shifts responsibility back to where power actually lives. With you. Stopping the chase does not mean the love disappears. It means the attachment loosens. And attachment is what kept you trapped in anticipation. This is one of the most misunderstood truths of the twin flame journey. Anticipation is more exhausting than grief. Grief has an end. Anticipation keeps you suspended in uncertainty. Waiting for someone to decide your worth is one of the most draining states the nervous system can experience. And eventually the body rebels. Not dramatically, but through numbness, fatigue, loss of interest. A quiet, I can't do this anymore. That is not giving up. That is self-preservation awakening. When you stop waiting, something surprising happens. Time returns. Energy returns. Attention returns. You begin to notice how much of your life was on hold. Dreams you postponed. Desires you minimized. Needs you ignored. And for the first time, you start filling your days with yourself. Not as a distraction, but as a reorientation. This is when the twin flame stops being the center and becomes a chapter. An important one, but no longer the sun everything revolves around. This is the moment the power dynamic collapses. Because power only exists when one person is waiting and the other is free. The moment you stop waiting, equality returns. Not necessarily in the relationship, but in you. And that is what changes everything. Energetically, chasing keeps the connection imbalanced. One person reaching, the other retreating. When you stop reaching, the field resets. Sometimes that reset brings reconnection. Sometimes it doesn't. But in both cases, the suffering ends. Because suffering was never about the outcome. It was about abandoning your center. Psychologically, this phase is disorienting. You may feel guilt for letting go. Fear that you are failing the journey. Anxiety that stopping means losing them forever. These fears are echoes of the old belief. If I don't hold on, I will disappear. But the truth is the opposite. You disappeared while holding on. Now you are returning. Returning to your body. Returning to your time. Returning to your choices. This is when self-worth stops being a concept and becomes an experience. You begin to feel stable without contact. Calm without reassurance. Whole without confirmation. And that wholeness feels unfamiliar at first. Almost empty. Because drama once filled that space. Longing once filled that space. Hope once filled that space. Now there is silence. But silence is not loss. Silence is integration. This is the phase where many people mistake peace for boredom. Because intensity was confused with love. But intensity was never love. Intensity was the nervous system oscillating between hope and fear. Peace feels different. Peace does not beg. Peace does not chase. Peace does not wait. Peace simply exists. And twin flame energy responds to peace far more than it ever responded to suffering. This is the great irony. The moment you stop making the twin flame the center, they lose their power over you. And power was the only thing blocking alignment. This does not mean you stop loving. It means you stop needing love to define you. And that distinction is everything. When you reclaim your center, something irreversible happens. Even if they return, you are no longer the same person. You no longer collapse into anticipation. You no longer negotiate your worth. You no longer confuse longing with destiny. And that is why this phase is often the point of no return. Because once you know what it feels like to be whole on your own, you cannot go back to waiting. In the next part, we will explore whether twin flames return after this shift, and why reunion is no longer the goal once self-worth is integrated. But for now, sit with this truth. The moment you stop chasing is not the moment you lose the twin flame. It is the moment you stop losing yourself. And that is the moment the journey finally begins to serve you. Not the other way around. Do twin flames return after you choose yourself? And why the answer changes everything. There is one question that lingers beneath every stage of the twin flame journey. It hides beneath spiritual language. It disguises itself as curiosity, pretends to be about destiny, but at its core it is always the same question. Will they come back? People rarely ask this question casually. They ask it with hope, with fear, with longing, and most importantly, with the belief that the answer will determine their worth. This is why part 6 is where the journey becomes truly uncomfortable, because the moment you choose yourself, the question of return loses its power. And that loss of power is the real transformation. Let's be honest. Before self-worth is integrated, reunion feels like the finish line. Feels like proof. Proof that the pain had meaning. Proof that you were chosen. Proof that you were enough. Reunion becomes the imagined moment where everything makes sense. But here is the truth most people are not ready to hear. If reunion is still the goal, self-worth is not yet complete. That does not mean you are failing. It means the lesson is still unfolding. Twin flame reunion is not blocked by timing, destiny, or spiritual readiness. It is blocked by need. Because need distorts alignment. Need turns love into leverage. Need turns connection into validation. Need turns union into compensation for suffering. Twin flame energy cannot stabilize under those conditions. This is why so many reunions, when they do happen prematurely, collapse again. Because nothing has fundamentally changed. The same wounds simply wear different clothes. Here is what actually changes after you choose yourself. You no longer need the twin flame to return, to confirm your value, your growth, or your awakening. That shift is subtle but absolute. And it alters the energetic equation completely. Before self-worth integration, the connection operates like this. You wait, they decide. You hope, they hold power. You adapt, they remain free. After self-worth integration, the dynamic dissolves. Not reverses. Dissolves. Because you are no longer positioning yourself beneath the outcome. You are standing beside yourself. This is where the question of return becomes irrelevant, and paradoxically possible. Here is the paradox no one prepares you for. Twin flames are most likely to return when their return no longer matters. Not because you stopped caring, but because you stopped needing. And need is the only thing that ever distorted the connection. When you choose yourself fully, one of three things happens. Not symbolically, energetically. 1. The twin flame returns, but as an equal. In some cases, the twin flame reappears. Not dramatically, not magically, but differently. They return without power, without control, without triggering urgency. And if they return in this way, you notice something immediately. You are not waiting. You are not proving. You are not hoping they choose you. You are choosing whether they still align with who you have become. This is not revenge. This is sovereignty. If reunion happens here, it is no longer about destiny. It is about compatibility in consciousness. And many people are shocked to discover they no longer want what they once begged for. Because the self they had to become, to complete the lesson, cannot live inside the old dynamic. 2. The twin flame does not return and you are free. This outcome terrifies people before self-worth integration. Afterwards it feels peaceful. Because by the time you stop needing the return, you have already reclaimed what you thought the reunion would give you. Confidence, stability, wholeness, direction. The twin flame was the catalyst, not the destination. And once the catalyst has done its work, the system no longer requires it. This is not failure. This is completion. Many people remain emotionally loyal to a connection that has already fulfilled its purpose. They wait out of habit, not love. But once self-worth is embodied, waiting no longer feels spiritual. It feels unnecessary. And that clarity is liberation. 3. The twin flame transforms without reuniting. In some cases, the connection shifts into something else entirely. Not romance, not separation, but integration. You carry the lessons without carrying the longing. You remember them without aching. You honor the connection without orbiting it. This is often the most misunderstood outcome, because people assume union must be physical to be real. But twin flame union was never about bodies. It was about identity realignment, and that has already occurred. Here is the truth beneath all three outcomes. Reunion is not the reward for healing. Freedom is. Freedom from obsession. Freedom from self-abandonment. Freedom from tying your worth to another person's presence. This is why the question, will they return, is the last attachment to dissolve. Because once it dissolves, You are no longer seeking permission to move forward. And that is when the journey truly ends or truly begins. Many people fear that choosing themselves means giving up on love. But choosing yourself does not end love. It ends need-based love. It ends love that requires suffering to feel meaningful. It ends love that demands self-sacrifice as proof of depth. And what remains is something quieter and far more stable. Love without urgency. Love without bargaining. Love without fear of loss. This is why twin flame teachings often feel cruel. Because they do not promise reunion. They promise truth. And the truth is this. The moment you stop asking whether the twin flame will return, is the moment you have reclaimed your power. At that point, return becomes optional. Not as a strategy, but as a natural byproduct of alignment or not. And either way, you are whole. In the next part, we will explore what happens when self-worth becomes embodied, not conceptual, and how your relationships, choices, and identity change permanently after the twin flame initiation. But for now, sit with this question. If the twin flame never returned, would anything essential be missing from who you are becoming? If the answer is no, the lesson is complete. And if the answer is still uncertain, that is not failure. It simply means the journey is still unfolding, exactly as it is meant to. What truly changes when self-worth becomes embodied, not just understood. There is a quiet misunderstanding about healing on the twin flame journey. Many people believe that once they understand the lesson, the work is done. They think insight equals completion. But insight is only the doorway. What changes your life is embodiment. Embodied self-worth is not something you declare. It is something you live without effort. And once it takes root, everything rearranges, not dramatically but permanently. You do not wake up one day feeling euphoric. You wake up feeling stable. And stability, for someone who has lived inside emotional intensity, feels almost unfamiliar. This is how you know something fundamental has shifted. Before embodiment, self-worth feels fragile. You can feel grounded one day and collapse the next. You still get pulled into old stories. You still feel the urge to check, to wonder, to measure yourself through another's response. But after embodiment, something stops responding. The hooks no longer catch. The same triggers appear, but they no longer control you. Because self-worth has moved from the mind into the nervous system. And the nervous system does not argue. It simply chooses safety. One of the first changes you notice is how quiet your inner world becomes. Not empty. Quiet. The constant mental loops dissolve. Replaying conversations. Interpreting silence. Imagining future reunions. Scanning for signs. Those loops were not curiosity. They were anxiety disguised as hope. And when self-worth integrates, anxiety loses its fuel. You stop needing reassurance because your system no longer believes love is scarce. This is the moment people often say, "I still love them, but I'm no longer consumed." That sentence marks a psychological rebirth. Because consumption was never love. Consumption was fear of loss. Love does not consume. It expands. Another profound shift happens in how you relate to desire. Before embodiment, desire felt urgent. You wanted clarity now, connection now, resolution now. After embodiment, desire becomes spacious. You still want connection, but you no longer rush toward it. You allow things to unfold, not because you are detached, but because you trust yourself to be okay regardless of outcome. This trust did not come from affirmations. It came from surviving the collapse. From choosing yourself when there was no guarantee it would be rewarded. That choice rewired something deep. And that rewiring affects every relationship, not just the twin flame. You begin to notice that certain dynamics no longer appeal to you. People who are inconsistent feel exhausting instead of intriguing. Emotional unavailability feels boring instead of magnetic. Drama feels loud instead of meaningful. This is one of the clearest signs of embodiment. You stop romanticizing what destabilizes you. Before, intensity felt like depth. Now depth feels like presence. You start valuing people who communicate clearly, respect your time, show up consistently, do not trigger your worth wounds. Not because you are settling, but because your nervous system no longer confuses chaos with connection. This is where many people feel disoriented. Because the old attraction patterns disappear. And with them, a familiar sense of identity fades. You are no longer the one who longs, the one who waits, the one who endures. So who are you now? You are someone who chooses. And choosing requires discernment. Discernment feels slower than obsession, but it is infinitely more powerful. Another subtle shift occurs in how you experience time. Before embodiment, time felt suspended. Your life paused at when this resolves. Everything waited for the twin flame outcome. After embodiment, time moves again. You make plans without checking if they align with reunion. You invest in your life without leaving emotional space reserved for someone else. This is not because you forgot the connection. It is because you stopped organizing your future around it. And this is often when opportunities appear. New work, new relationships, new directions. Not as distractions, but as expressions of your reclaimed center. This is also when grief may resurface, unexpectedly. Not sharp grief, but a softer mourning. You mourn the version of yourself who suffered. You mourn the fantasy that once kept you going. You mourn the belief that pain would be rewarded with reunion. This grief is not regression. It is integration. You are releasing an identity, not a person. And releasing identity always hurts a little. But it also frees immense energy. That energy now belongs to you. This is why embodied self-worth changes your sense of agency. You stop asking, what does this mean spiritually? And start asking, does this align with who I am now? Spiritual meaning becomes secondary to lived truth. And lived truth is grounded, practical, and self-honoring. This does not make you less spiritual. It makes you embodied. One of the most radical changes happens in how you relate to uncertainty. Before embodiment, uncertainty was intolerable. It triggered fear, stories, waiting, chasing. After embodiment, uncertainty becomes neutral. You don't need to resolve everything immediately. You don't need guarantees to move forward. You trust your capacity to respond rather than predict. This is maturity. This is emotional adulthood. And twin flame love was the catalyst that forced you into it. Here is a difficult truth many people resist. Once self-worth is embodied, the twin flame connection is no longer central. Even if it remains meaningful, it becomes contextual. One influence among many, not the axis of your existence. This does not diminish its significance, completes it, because the purpose was never to keep you circling the same pain. The purpose was to return you to yourself with clarity. And once that happens, the connection no longer needs to dominate your life. It has done its work. This is why people who have truly integrated the lesson often stop consuming twin flame content obsessively. They don't need constant validation of the journey. They don't need reassurance that it meant something. They know. And knowing is quiet. Embodied self-worth does not announce itself. It expresses itself through boundaries. Through calm choices, through a refusal to abandon yourself for love. And once you live from that place, something irreversible has occurred. You cannot unsee the truth. You cannot unfeel the stability. You cannot return to the version of you who waited to be chosen. That version no longer exists. In the next part, we will explore the final integration. How twin flame love transforms into wisdom, compassion, and grounded love, rather than longing. But for now, sit with this truth. Understanding self-worth changes how you think. Embodying self-worth changes how you live. And once it changes how you live, everything else must follow. How twin flame longing transforms into wisdom, compassion, and grounded love. There is a stage on the twin flame journey that feels almost anticlimactic. Not because it lacks depth, but because it lacks drama. This is the stage where love stops hurting. Not because everything worked out the way you once imagined, but because you no longer need pain to give love meaning. This is where the alchemy completes. Before this point, love felt like fire. Intense, uncontrollable, transformative but destructive. Fire burns away illusions, but it cannot be lived inside. Eventually, fire must become light. And that transition is what most people misunderstand. They think that if the longing fades, the love was never real. But the opposite is true. If love cannot evolve beyond longing, it was never mature enough to last. Twin flame love is not meant to remain a wound. It is meant to become wisdom. Wisdom does not ache. Wisdom does not chase. Wisdom understands. This is the phase where you begin to see the entire journey differently. Not romantically, not tragically, but clearly. You no longer view the twin flame as someone who did something to you. You see them as someone who participated in a sacred exchange. An exchange that costs both of you something. And that recognition softens the heart. One of the most profound shifts at this stage is the rise of compassion without attachment. Before, compassion was entangled with hope. You understood them, but you also waited. You forgave them, but you also longed. You empathized, but you also diminished yourself. Now compassion stands alone. You can see their wounds without wanting to heal them. You can acknowledge their limitations without needing them to change. You can hold love without needing proximity. This is not emotional distance. It is emotional maturity. This is the point where the narrative changes from, "They hurt me," to, "They were wounded and so was I." And then finally to, "We met to wake each other up." No blame. No pedestal. No resentment. Just truth. Grounded love does not rewrite the past. It integrates it. Another shift happens in how you understand soul contracts. Earlier in the journey, the idea of destiny felt intoxicating. You searched for signs, timelines, confirmations. You wanted proof that the suffering was justified. At this stage, you realize something quietly revolutionary. Meaning does not require permanence. A connection can be life-altering without being lifelong. A love can be sacred without being sustained. A meeting can fulfill its purpose without continuing its form. This understanding releases the last layer of grasping. Because grasping was always about fear, not love. Wisdom recognizes that souls meet for many reasons, not all of them romantic, not all of them permanent. And that realization expands your capacity for love rather than shrinking it. You become less possessive of connection, less threatened by endings, less desperate to define relationships by labels. You allow love to be what it is, not what it must become. This is why grounded love feels so different in the body. There is no urgency, no tightness, no anticipation mixed with dread. Instead, there is a sense of open presence. You can think of the twin flame without spiraling. You can remember the connection without reopening the wound. You can even feel affection without desire pulling you off center. That is integration. And integration is the final gift of the journey. This is also where forgiveness becomes effortless. Not performative forgiveness. Not spiritual bypassing. But genuine release. You no longer forgive to heal the connection. You forgive because there is nothing left to protect. Your worth is intact. Your identity is stable. The past no longer threatens you. So forgiveness arises naturally. You may even feel gratitude. Not the forced gratitude people preach prematurely, but a quiet acknowledgement that says, "This changed me in ways comfort never could." That gratitude does not mean you would choose the pain again. It means you honor what it forged in you. At this stage, many people notice a shift in how they love everyone. Friends, family, future partners. Love becomes less transactional. You stop keeping score. You stop giving to be chosen. You stop withholding to protect yourself. Not because you are naive, but because you are no longer afraid of losing yourself. This is the paradox. Once you know you can survive loss, you stop fearing love. And fear was always what distorted love into obsession. Grounded love does not collapse when challenged. It adapts, communicates. It leaves when misaligned without drama. And this is often when people attract relationships that feel surprisingly calm. At first, this calm can feel suspicious. Where is the spark? Where is the intensity? But then you realize, the spark is not anxiety. The spark is presence. The spark is safety. The spark is being met without having to perform. This is the love twin flame longing was preparing you for. Not necessarily with the twin flame themselves, but with life. This is where twin flame love transcends its original form. Stops being about one person. It becomes a way of loving. A way that includes yourself. A way that honors truth over fantasy. A way that values alignment over attachment. And this is the moment when the journey no longer needs to be named. You stop asking whether this was a twin flame. You stop analyzing stages. You stop measuring progress because you are living the outcome. The outcome was never union. It was embodiment. The ability to love deeply without losing yourself. The ability to connect without abandoning your center. The ability to let go without closing your heart. This is the alchemy. Fire into light. Longing into wisdom. Attachment into compassion. Pain into clarity. The twin flame journey does not end with answers. It ends with presence. And presence is enough. In the next and final part, we will explore how to carry this wisdom forward. How to live, love, and choose from the grounded self you have become, without returning to old patterns. But for now, sit with this truth. The highest form of twin flame love is not reunion, but transformation. And once transformation is complete, love no longer needs to hurt to be real. Simply is. How to live, love, and choose once you no longer abandon yourself. There is a moment after the twin flame journey that feels strangely quiet. Not empty. Not dull. Just unburdened. You wake up and realize your day is no longer shaped by emotional weather. You are not scanning for signs. You are not replaying conversations. You are not measuring your worth against another person's availability. Life is simply happening, and you are inside it again. This is the part of the journey almost no one prepares you for. Because spiritual teachings often glorify awakening, but rarely explain how to live after awakening. Once the intensity dissolves, once the longing softens, once the identity built around the twin flame collapses, a new question emerges. Who am I now, and how do I live from this place? Living from the grounded self is not dramatic. It is practical. And that practicality is what makes it powerful. The first thing that changes is how you make decisions. Before, choices were filtered through hope. You asked, will this affect the connection? What if they come back? Should I wait a little longer? Your life bent around a possible future. Now decisions are filtered through alignment. You ask, does this support who I am becoming? That single question changes everything. You no longer pause your life for potential outcomes. You move forward based on present truth. And present truth is grounded, not hypothetical. This shift shows up clearly in relationships. You stop tolerating ambiguity, not because you demand certainty, but because your nervous system no longer finds ambiguity familiar or safe. You gravitate toward people who are emotionally available, clear, and consistent. Not because they are perfect, but because they do not require you to disappear to be loved. And if someone cannot meet you there, you don't spiral. You don't convince. You don't chase. You simply step back. That stepping back is not withdrawal. It is self-respect in motion. Another major shift occurs in how you relate to love itself. Love is no longer something you fall into. It is something you participate in consciously. You are present in your body. You notice how interactions feel, not just how they look or promise to become. You trust subtle signals. You listen when something feels off instead of overriding it with fantasy. This does not make you guarded. It makes you attuned. You have learned the difference. Living from the grounded self also changes how you experience solitude. Before, being alone felt like waiting. Waiting for messages. Waiting for resolution. Waiting for reunion. Now solitude feels like space. Space to breathe. Space to create. Space to deepen into yourself. You no longer rush to fill silence. You no longer use connection to escape yourself. And because of that, connection becomes richer, not scarcer. One of the most profound changes happens in your relationship with time. Time no longer feels urgent. You are not racing toward an outcome. You are inhabiting your life. This presence allows you to invest in things that once felt secondary. Your work, your creativity, your health, your friendships. Not as distractions, but as expressions of your grounded self. This is often when people experience a quiet renaissance. Not explosive success, but steady expansion. You begin building a life that does not revolve around emotional volatility. And that stability creates momentum. Another subtle but crucial shift is how you handle emotional discomfort. Before, discomfort triggered analysis. What does this mean? Why is this happening? What lesson am I failing? Now, discomfort is allowed to exist without being interrogated. You feel it. You stay present. You respond instead of react. This is emotional maturity. You no longer use spirituality to bypass human experience. You let yourself be human without losing yourself. This grounded self is not numb. It still feels sadness, disappointment, longing, desire. But those emotions no longer define you. They pass through instead of pulling you under. This is how self-worth becomes lived reality. Self-worth is no longer something you affirm. It is something you protect through choice. You protect it by not staying where you feel unseen, not explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you, not investing in connections that destabilize your center. These protections are not walls. They are boundaries. And boundaries are what make love sustainable. Living from the ground itself also reshapes how you understand spirituality. Spirituality becomes embodied, less about signs, less about destiny, less about cosmic narratives, more about integrity, more about presence, more about living in alignment with your values, even when no one is watching. You realize something deeply freeing. You do not need suffering to evolve. You do not need pain to prove depth. You do not need intensity to feel alive. Those beliefs belong to an earlier version of you, the version who had not yet learned how to stay with themselves. Now you are staying. This is why many people feel less interested in retelling their twin flame story. Not because it wasn't meaningful, but because it is no longer central. It becomes one chapter, not the whole book. And this is where compassion extends to your past self. You stop judging the choices you made while you were wounded. You see them as survival strategies. You honor the courage it took to walk through the fire. And you do not romanticize the burn. You carry the wisdom forward, not the pain. Living from the ground itself also changes how you love the world. You become less reactive, less polarized, less invested in proving your truth. You listen more. You respond with nuance. You choose peace without feeling like you are betraying passion. This does not make you passive. It makes you rooted. And rooted people are powerful because they are not easily shaken. The twin flame journey was not meant to give you answers. It was meant to give you yourself back with clarity. And now life becomes the practice. Every day you choose alignment. Every day you notice when something pulls you off center and you return. Every day you live from the self that no longer abandons itself for love. This is the real outcome. Not reunion. Not labels. Not destiny stories. But a grounded, self-honoring way of living. In the final part, we will bring everything together. The full arc of the twin flame journey. And close with the core truth that ties it all together. But for now, sit with this. The greatest proof that the twin flame journey worked is not who stayed in your life, but who you became. And from this place, every choice you make is no longer a reaction to loss, but an expression of wholeness. The truth twin flame love was always trying to teach you. Every journey has a moment where it quietly reveals its true purpose. Not in fireworks, not in dramatic reunions, not in cosmic confirmation, but in a single realization that settles so deeply. It no longer needs explanation. The twin flame journey reaches that moment here. And the realization is this: they were never the center of the story. You were. From the very beginning. This truth often feels anticlimactic to the mind, but profoundly relieving to the soul, because it dissolves the final illusion. The illusion that this journey was about another person. When you first encountered your twin flame, it felt like destiny had arrived. You believed the story was about recognition, union, eternal love. And in a way it was. But not in the way you thought. The recognition was never of them. It was recognition of yourself, reflected back to you with unbearable clarity. The union was never meant to be external first. It was meant to be internal. And the love was never meant to be a reward. It was meant to be a teacher. Twin flame love is often described as the highest form of love. That description is misleading, because it makes people chase the connection rather than the lesson. The highest form of love is not intensity. It is truth without self-abandonment. And twin flame love demands that truth. Relentlessly. Painfully. Unavoidably. This is why the journey feels so personal. Because it dismantles every place where you outsourced your worth. Every place where you believed love had to be earned. every place where you waited for permission to exist fully. The twin flame journey does not ask, how much can you love another? It asks, how deeply are you willing to stand in yourself? And that question reshapes everything. Looking back, you can now see the arc clearly. The attraction was the hook. The intensity was the ignition. The separation was the initiation. The suffering was the purification. The self-choice was the turning point. The embodiment was the completion. Nothing was random. Nothing was wasted. Even the pain that once felt unbearable served a precise function. It broke the structures that could not support your growth. It stripped away identities built on lack. It forced you to confront the belief that being chosen equals being worthy. And once that belief collapsed, something else emerged. A quieter truth. A stronger foundation. A self that no longer negotiates its value. This is why the journey feels complete now. Not because every question has been answered, but because the right question has dissolved. You are no longer asking, why did this happen to me? You are no longer asking, was it real? You are no longer asking, will they come back? Those questions belong to a version of you who believed meaning lived outside of themselves. That version was not wrong. They were learning. And learning sometimes requires losing the story that once sustained you. The final integration of the twin flame journey is not romantic. It is liberating. You stop needing a narrative where suffering proves depth. You stop clinging to the idea that pain must be rewarded. You stop measuring your worth against what someone else could or could not offer. And in that release, love becomes clean. Not dramatic. Not consuming. Clean. This is the kind of love that does not require intensity to feel real. The kind of love that does not destabilize your life to feel meaningful. The kind of love that includes yourself fully. At this stage, something subtle but powerful happens. You realize that twin flame love did not take anything from you. It gave you something you could not have accessed otherwise. Sovereignty. The ability to remain present in love without disappearing. The ability to choose without fear of abandonment. The ability to walk away without closing your heart. This is the real union. Union with your values. Union with your body. Union with your truth. And once that union exists, external outcomes lose their charge. Whether the twin flame returns or not, becomes irrelevant to your wholeness. Not because the connection didn't matter, but because it has already fulfilled its purpose. This is why many people feel an unexpected grief at the end of the journey. Not grief for the person, but grief for the story. The story that once gave meaning to suffering. The story that promised eventual payoff. Letting go of that story feels like letting go of identity. But identity built on pain cannot sustain peace. And peace is what your nervous system has been learning to choose all along. The twin flame journey does not end with certainty. It ends with trust. Trust in yourself. Trust in your choices. Trust that you no longer need to bleed to grow. And that trust changes how you move through the world. You love with discernment. You connect with presence. You leave when alignment is gone. You stay when truth is mutual. You do not chase. You do not wait. You do not bargain with your worth. You live. This is the quiet victory of the journey. And it is rarely recognized from the outside. But you feel it. In how your body relaxes. In how your mind settles. In how your life expands. You are no longer someone searching for completion. You are someone expressing wholeness. And that was the destination all along. If you are still in the middle of this journey, still hurting, still longing, still searching for answers, know this: you are not behind. You are not failing. You are becoming. Every stage has its wisdom. Every phase has its function. And nothing about your experience was a mistake. But if you have reached this place, where the pain has softened, where the questions have quieted, where you are choosing yourself without apology, then the journey has done its work. Not because love ended, but because love evolved.